Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to present the exploration results from Nueva Esperanza, and thank you to the board for this opportunity, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been looking at this photograph for a little while, so I thought I might just explain a little bit of what we're seeing here. We're looking towards Argentina. We're looking east. Everything in the foreground here is part of the Nueva Esperanza project, not including those volcanoes there. The mountains here are about 6,000 meters high, and we're sitting in a position here from the photograph of about 5,000 meters. And the project area is actually pretty much this area in here. That's the Chimberos remnant pit, which I'll be talking about later on. And I'll also be talking about a new discovery in Cerro Blanco West, which is roughly in this area here. The Arqueros deposit is in this little gully in here, and the Teterita deposit, which I'll also refer to, is over here roughly. So that just explains that slide that has been in the backdrop for a little while. Disclaimers, I don't think everyone's ever read one of these. So Kingsgate, as we all know, has been a producer in the past. It's produced out of two mines, one in Thailand and one in Australia. But since the closure of the Chachri mine, the strategic focus has been towards Chile. It had been there before, but now it's even more concentrated. We basically have been successful there. We've been successful in acquisition and discoveries, and we will continue to grow that very prospective prospect. Our strategy is actually to continue the work that we're doing in Nueva Esperanza on the feasibility side, the permitting side, the exploration, and as well, obviously, any opportunistic mergers and acquisitions. Kingsgate is a very experienced epithermal gold company. For a long time, Gavin Thomas was our CEO, and his DNA was implanted on every geologist that works for the company. He was one of the discoverers of the Lihir gold mine, so he knew a thing or two, and he knew that this particular prospect was a bull terrier, in his own words. And I'm just sorry that obviously that he's not with us anymore, but that he hasn't been able to see some of the results that we've gained since he's departed. The advantage of the Nueva Esperanza property is that it's essentially a brownfields exploration play. It's had mining production, both underground and from open pit. Obviously, the very highest grades, some of the highest grades have been mined, but there's a considerable remnant mineralization, and there's a number of targets around, which I'll show you in a moment, that are very prospective, and we're currently prioritizing those targets as a primary exploration focus. But at the same time, a new business, a VP, a Vice President of Business Development and Exploration has been appointed to the company, also a very experienced geologist, and he's looking at greenfields exploration and in the Maricunga region and reviewing a number of very exciting projects. So a quick overview of Nueva Esperanza. A strategy is to we have actually built off a pre-feasibility study that we completed last year. It's been reviewed in detail by the chosen consultants, Arsenco, and they went into a great deal of detail to prove that our numbers were actually very, very close to what they got. So it has had an independent audit, and of course we will continue to explore and add life to the project. As I mentioned before, there has been mining of bonanza grades in a fragmented ownership on this property, but this is the first time, Kingsgate, that actually encapsulates whole of the Nueva Esperanza assets. It has a huge alteration footprint, which means in non-technical terms that it's the rocks that are prospective for mineralization. We can actually recognize them where they're not undercover. But that's kind of like the canvas for where we look for deposits. There's some of the core issues in Chile are to do with power and water, and those have been secured by the company. we are in the process of converting this pre-feasibility study into a feasibility study, and there's a team actively working on that right now. It's quite an extensive team. And we continue with exploration. We have a drill rig on the ground, drilling as we speak. I'll talk about that a little bit further later. And as mentioned by the chairman, there is a timeline and a pretty healthy budget to develop this project and continue exploration. Since the acquisition by Kingsgate, we've actually grown the asset by a combination of acquisition and exploration success to almost doubling its size. I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, this is a 3-minute flyover, which I will show you. It has been shown before, but there's probably some people that haven't seen it. It's 3.5 minutes, and it's quite helpful to give you an overview. Oops, back the other way. Yeah. I'll just comment a little bit to it. Obviously that's we're up in the northern part of Chile. It's a very dry part of the world. It's one of the driest land deserts in the world, actually. And the Maricunga belt is a very productive belt with a number of quite major deposits, and both still in resource and some have been mined out, and some are in the process of still being mined. So we're traveling north and looking through the various different mines and projects, their resources in gold and silver. What the histograms show, obviously Mina Maricunga is only silver. De la Pepa, Volcan, which is volcano in Spanish. Cerro Maricunga, it's in development, it's in an advanced pre-feasibility stage. La Coipa is actually closed at the moment. Nueva Esperanza, as we know. And very importantly, this Salares Norte, which extends the Maricunga further north by about 50 kilometers from what it was known to be in the past, which really does open up quite a few major opportunities for exploration. This is the mining tenement that we have, the concession, and these are the various deposit names for actually locations that do contain silver and gold. Teterita, this is the drilling in Teterita, sort of look like an X-ray view of it, and a solid of the silver ore body that is contained, and that's the pit shell that would extract that mineralization. You can see it's very shallow. The tops of the drill holes correspond to the natural surface, the topography. And this is still Teterita, looking at it from the surface, the drill hole collars in the little black cubes. We're flying over into Arqueros. You can see Arqueros Transexa Valley. That's all the drilling, including underground drilling. There's a substantial amount of drilling in this project. The silver system and in the gold feeder systems that actually pop through into the silver system. So the yellow solids are the gold mineralization. That was mined at 7 grams per ton, actually, from underground mining. And then you can see some of the old workings, which we've been down into and got a good view of the ore body. And now we fly through Chimberos. That's a pit that's been mined out by Kinross. Mantos de Oro was the group that are essentially owned by Kinross. They've picked out the highest grades. That would be the solid that existed there. Some of that is remnant at the moment. And as we go to the west, we find the lovely Chimberos gold system that we discovered a couple of years ago. We believe that there's more of those around. The reason it wasn't discovered by the previous owners is because it was undercover. It didn't expose. It wasn't exposed. In fact, they had a haul road running right over it, which I'll show you later on. Ironically, the best value of that deposit was right underneath their feet. So that's the alteration. That red is the alteration footprint, 45 square kilometers. And there are various hits around the neighborhood, if you like. Obviously the focus for us is gold, and the gold and silver are closely associated. So by finding silver, we're hoping that we'll find gold as well. As I mentioned before, the characteristics of the Maricunga is that the southern portion of it is predominantly porphyry with gold and copper. Some of these are very big deposits, but they're very low grade. Some are even lower than half a gram, which is why, even though they have big figures for their resource, they're not in operation. And then the northern part is the epithermal system. They're a little bit easier to process. Generally speaking, they're friendly ore types, and particularly in the oxide zone, especially in the oxide zone. And you know, I've mentioned before, Saladas Norte up here. Basically, it was thought that that round about Nueva Esperanza was the northern limit, so it's opened up at least 50 kilometers, and another explorers are way up here, still finding some very interesting occurrences of gold. So it's a big field, it's an evolving field, there's majors that are coming in. I heard recently the Newcrest is actually looking at getting into Chile, we believe it's extremely productive. And so this is actually a real number. If you add up all those, you do get 100-odd million ounces of gold equivalent. Gold equivalent is really basically factoring the silver and adding it to the gold if there is no gold, or combining both together. It's a way of combining both metals together, and the formula for that is in here. Saladas Norte, 3.7 million ounces, predominantly gold. It's only 45 silver, but 4.2. In fact, that's 4.5 now. And even though that project, Saladas Norte, is in feasibility study and permitting, exploration continues. And we know from the grapevine that they're getting some very good results. And Goldfield are keeping it quiet. This is actually their key exploration asset at the moment. Nueva Esperanza, historic bonanza silver. We've consolidated this in 2012. We've done quite a lot of work, mostly drilling, and we had a breakthrough with the discovery of gold, and also at one stage the project was encumbered by extremely high power costs, because the power to bring to Nueva Esperanza had to come all the way from Patagonia, practically, or not just north of Patagonia, in the Lakes District, and had to be carried all the way up to here, and then there was a gap in here between that and the northern power system. So now there's numerous solar plants that are actually connecting the whole systems through, and so that's brought the power down quite significantly, and that's been a very major contribution to making the project profitable. Arqueros, I mentioned before, had 7 grams. At one stage, Chimberos was being carted, the ore from Chimberos that you saw in that, was being carted 40 kilometers over the mountains at over 5,000 meters elevation and being taken down to La Coipa. They stopped La Coipa production in order to get that Chimberos ore through the mill, because it was the richest gold mine in the world at that time. Sorry, silver mine, sorry, thanks Ross. She was gold. It is gold. We know that now. It has significant gold. So, so a little bit. I don't want to bore you with technical details, but yes, epithermal means that the mineralization is formed fairly close to the surface. Brownfields is what we refer to as deposits or occurrences that have exploration potential, have some sort of association of gold or silver, and we believe there's tremendous growth potential here. I did actually have a slide early on where I had the harbour bridge for scale, but it's too small, you can't even see it. Might get back to that if you're interested. Oh, there it is. Yeah. The harbour bridge is here. Okay, that gives you some sense of the scale of these individual deposits that we already have. And we've conducted a blast hole drilling campaign in 15 and 16, which significantly added to our knowledge of the system, because a lot of this area is under sort of scree cover, so it's not exposed. This slide here is a model adapted from Richard Silito, who's a great believer in this project. He's one of the preeminent geologists in the world to this day. In South America, he's the guru of gold and silver epithermal land deposits. He's one of the most written. He's got over 100 papers to his name and 2 books. He is really the guru, and he's been to this project as recently as 2 years ago, and he's very excited about it. What's interesting is that our various deposits seem to lie into different parts of this epithermal system, which means that there's this variety in here. it's not a simple system, and obviously we don't know the arrangement of volcanoes that were responsible for this mineralization because they're eroded, but it's definitely have a pretty good idea of where it is, the Cerro Bravo system. So the thing that's also become quite interesting recently is that the gold that we found at Chimberos was very closely associated with the dacite dome, and that's very much the case at La Coipa and also at Salares Norte. So what we're doing is we're actually integrating what we've learned from La Coipa. We've acquired a lot of that information, what we've learned from Salares Norte, and we're integrating that into our own models so that we can actually use those tools to better plan our exploration. So this is a little bit how, kind of as technical as I'm going to get. We look at various layers of data, geochemistry, geophysics, remote sensing data, alteration mapping, mapping of structures and geology, and we combine all those different layers of data to develop a prospectivity map. It tells us kind of a ranking of where we would want to go next, or what are the priorities or the targets that we want to pursue. And that's recently led to the discovery of the Cerro Blanco West. Now that's fairly recent. It's Kingsgate's latest discovery. As I said, there's a drill rig there right now working on that. And we've had some pretty exciting results. This is, it's largely undercover. That's why it wasn't known about previously. So it's a good deal of this is scree cover. These lines, the green dots are the holes that we've drilled to date, and some of these red ones are actually drilled now. The program has been in place for about a month since the season became available to us, and I can say that we are getting some pretty interesting results, and we expect some assay results coming back in the next few weeks. But the geologists on the field are saying that rocks look very similar to the rocks that we actually got mineralization in, so we're very excited about that. And we are stepping out on 100-meter line spacing, so we're not actually doing any infill drilling here. We're really trying to expand the footprint of the mineralization, and also we have this notion that working near these domes is very important from the point of view of trying to find gold mineralization. It's also very deeply oxidized, which is actually a very important feature. The deep oxidation is indication that the system is still alive and well, and it's also amenable to processing, because if the mineralization is not oxidized, it becomes difficult for processing. This is a cross-section of the kind of mineralization that we're getting at Cerro Blanco. So this is like a slice, a horizontal, a vertical slice through the drilling, and gives you some idea of the kind of intersections which are all new. I mentioned a little bit about the resource growth there when we acquired Laguna Resources, so when the previous owners of this project, we basically acquired 28 million tons for about 1 million ounces of gold equivalent. That's all we had. We had this Arqueros mining concession with the Arqueros deposit in there, and the remnant mineralization of that constituted this 28 million tons. The following year, we acquired the Esperanza leases, which we later renamed Nueva Esperanza, and that's this big outline here, which contained the Chimberos and the pit. And by acquisition, we added 40% from these two deposits. And then a couple of years later, we discovered Chimberos gold and added another 400,000 or 500,000 ounces, 500,000 ounces. And that's a 90% growth since we actually went in there in 2012, since we got full control of it in 2012. And this is what the Chimberos gold system looks like. This is underlying this image is the Google Earth view of the Chimberos pit that was mined by Kinross. And you can see they were hauling ore out of here right over this, out of this absolute beautiful mineralization sitting barely 10 meters beneath the surface. And when I asked, why haven't we drilled this area here? And said, oh no, it's drilled. I said, oh, they did drill it. Yeah, they did. So what's the story? Oh, they didn't assay for gold. So they assayed only for silver. So they actually drilled this thing. They hit a breccia, and they didn't assay for gold. We didn't have any of the cuttings, but we had a sniff of gold on the edge here, and that's how we followed this thing up. And we had one intersection there of 170 meters at 2.79 grams a ton gold. That included 36 meters, I think I wrote it down here, yes, 36 meters at 8.6 grams of gold and 177 grams of silver in that same drill hole. And this is, I wish, Gavin had been around to see this, because he would have given it the definite bull terrier status for sure. And we know there's more of these around. They're undercover, obviously, because we've covered all the surface. We've explored the surface. And we're following it up. We have a good team in Chile, and we're in the process of following up. And we are very, very confident that we are going to increase this system quite substantially. And I'm talking by substantially, I mean by millions of ounces. That's the kind of footprint that this has. Bear in mind that here in La Coipa, right, this is a La Coipa which produced 3.5 million ounces of gold and 230 million ounces of silver, has a very similar alteration footprint. These images are not doctored, these are just straight out of a satellite, although there's probably some image enhancing, but they're not differentially doctored. So you can see that the alteration footprint is quite similar. And importantly, here in La Coipa, they were still discovering things 10, 20 years after they started mining production. So I'm fully confident that exactly the same thing is going to happen, because the two deposits are so incredibly similar. They're similar in age, they're similar in alteration style, and they're similar in the textures that you see. And I'm very encouraged by that. And Gueros Norte is giving us a taste of what could be out there. I mean, we've been talking, 1 or 2 grams here, but they've got 4.5 grams. And again, the entire deposit at Saladas Norte is buried under cover of about anywhere between 10 and 30 meters of cover. So, there's techniques for looking under cover, and we're using those techniques. You can't really see under cover. It's an expression that geologists use, but it's sort of things that guide us to look under cover. So this is our business strategy and a pipeline. We've got generative targets here, down here at the bottom. These are regional, broad-based target creation. We've had people coming to us that have looked for copper in the area, and they're not interested in looking for gold, or they don't have expertise in looking for gold. So we're processing those sets of data. We obviously have the Maricunga regional targets with greenfields exploration. We've had teams out there looking around in places that are still open. We've mostly been discussing this area here because obviously that's the concrete focus in front of us right now in terms of developing the project. And of course we're in feasibility study with the 3 known deposits. So for the current financial year, the workflow that we have envisaged is obviously to progress the feasibility study and also on a separate division, the permitting side of things. Continue engaging the community as we have. We're fortunate that there are really no resident members of the community here, but there are these tribal groups that have essentially certain rights to pass by the area or pasture. We will be doing some more corroboratory work on the existing deposits, as I mentioned in permitting. So we're using this, all the latest information that we can gather, and we're in the process of negotiating information from previous owners that have some very fancy data sets. And we're drilling as we speak, and we're getting some pretty interesting results that we hope to be reporting in some weeks ahead. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, question over here.
Where's the water coming from?
Yes, I can show you where the water is coming from. It's coming from a bore field in the plains down here. So it's actually bore water.
Is it enough?
Yes, more than enough actually. Yeah, we're very fortunate. And also it's important that a lot of the new projects in Chile now are being permitted only if they bring in water from the sea. But this project went through a process where we were allowed to extract bore water. And I think Chairman made a reference to paying royalty for some of that water because we actually acquired. Over there, the water rights are held separately. And another company has those water rights even though they don't have a project there. They were a previous owner of this project. And and we actually have to pay royalties even though we're not using the water, because it kind of secures that water right.
We have found some on our properties as well.
And we have found water on our property, but that's a permitting process that has to go through as well before we can actually use our own water.
Is the area prone to earthquakes or
Yes.
wind?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's not prone for flooding or anything like that because it only snows here. The only precipitation that you get here is snow. There's no rain, but it is prone for earthquakes. The whole of the western coast of South America is, for that matter, and that's built into our feasibility study.
And what about volcanic activity? You
No.
mentioned
No volcano. This was former volcanoes, and there hasn't been volcanic activity here. There are some active volcanoes further out to the east, but in the area that we are, these are all extinct volcanoes. There's no hydrothermal activity, no hot water activity anymore. All that activity happened while all this gold and silver was being deposited while the volcanoes were active. So these are, if you like fossilized, volcanoes. Any other questions?
Just want to check, are we talking open pit mining like Chapter
Yes,
here?
yes,
Yeah.
definitely open pit mining. Yeah. So that's our target. Obviously, if we find something that's deep and high grade, we'll consider an underground operation as well.
Much later.
That comes later because it's much more expensive to explore for that.
Yeah, well, I like
Drilling deeper. We're looking for the low-hanging fruit at the moment. That's
It's,
basically.
it's Kingsgate's specialty. I mean, similar
Correct.
it's been seen what's happened with the pit
Yeah,
in Thailand, which was once a hill.
correct.
So a hill was turned into a very,
Correct.
very successful, safe
Correct.
open pit mining
Hills are
operation.
great because they actually work in your favour in terms of strip ratio. You have to, the nature's taken away some of the waste rock,
Yeah.
and you're actually they're really quite nice to work with hills.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the fact that Kingsgate's done this already in Thailand, which is not a mining-friendly jurisdiction,
Correct.
in fact, it's just been recently taken over by a regime with no governing experience whatsoever and ruined it. But the fact that we've done this in a non-mining-friendly jurisdiction,
Yeah.
I think we've got the team to do it again. And
Yeah.
thanks to Russ for his time at the helm as well. And I hope that's going to continue for many years to come.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for your attention.